Hello and welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast, and I am your host, Samuel. In this podcast, I interview top medical sales reps and leading medical sales executives across the entire country. And it doesn't matter what medical sales industry, from medical device to pharmaceutical to genetic testing to diagnostic lab, you name it. You will learn how to either break into the industry, be a top 5% performer within your role in sales, or climb the corporate ladder. Welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Medical Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Samuel, and today we have with us another special guest, and he goes by the name of Tori Mosley. He is originally from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, but now living in Seattle, and he is the Strategic Account Executive at Salesforce. Why Salesforce? Why are we talking about Salesforce on the Medical Sales Podcast? Here at Evolve Success, we see a lot of things. And one trend we've seen are people that want to leave tech sales to get into med sales and people that want to leave med sales to get into tech sales. This episode serves to address what that experience might be like for those of you considering it. And it goes along with what Tori Mosley's experience is. Salesforce, as most of us should know, is a well-known software company, and Tori works with enterprise and mid-market level accounts to structure and set them up with their IT needs, like basic needs such as CRMs. This episode talks about Salesforce and what it's like to sell within that organization. But Tori graduated with a degree in chemistry and a minor in biology, and he had some experience in med sales. So he's going to talk about the differences. So if anyone out there has always been wondering, or maybe you're in a medical sales position and you're thinking to yourself, I've always wanted to make that leap into tech. What would that actually look like for me? This is the episode you absolutely have to listen to. As always, we're bringing you guests that are doing things differently in medical sales, innovating, pioneering, trailblazing new ways, and giving us insight into what really goes on in all of these different fields. So thank you for always listening to the Medical Sales Podcast, and I really do hope you enjoy this interview. Hey, Tori, how are we doing today?
Doing well. How about yourself, Sam?
No complaints. Why don't you tell the audience who you are and what you do?
So, Tori Mosley here from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, but living here in Seattle, and I do strategic sales over at Salesforce.
Strategic sales at Salesforce. Okay, so this is the Medical Sales Podcast. So everyone's wondering, okay, why is this strategic Salesforce on this show? But why don't you tell us a little bit more about what that actually means? What is strategic sales for Salesforce?
Yeah. So I work with enterprise and mid-market level accounts to structure, these can be hundreds of thousands or multi-million-dollar deals to set them up with their IT needs for the future. This goes into like basic needs such as like CRM, like I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with if you do any kind of sales of CRM, but this also goes into Slack, like messaging and collaborating, and then also Tableau for analytics. So for instance, if you're looking at any dashboards or reports on like sales reports, pipeline, I sell those products as well as MuleSoft, which integrates data. So I'm a core rep at Salesforce more specifically. So I handle the entire bag. So everything that Salesforce sells, I'm responsible for. The strategic part is more aligned to the account and the amount of employees at those accounts.
Got it. And is your role more customer service than sales, or are you actually doing a lot of selling?
Yeah, so I'm only net new business. So so it's all hunting, so to speak. I'm given like a certain amount of named accounts, and it is my responsibility to grow those accounts. Kind of like a lot of med reps would give. They get a certain amount of hospitals, a certain amount of doctors, and then there's their responsibility to kind of grow. Got
it. And Salesforce is a big company. I mean, that has a lot of name recognition as it is. Talk to us a little bit about, is the reality of selling for Salesforce, is the challenge in getting someone to believe, or is the challenge more somewhere else because it's Salesforce? Does that not make a difference? What's your experience there?
Yeah, so it just depends. You're meeting everybody in different buying journeys, right? So you're meeting customers kind of where they are. And some people, it could be white space, so to speak, where you're trying to get them to buy into the vision. Salesforce is 9 times out of 10 the Ferrari. Like it is probably not what it is probably more than it's more expensive. It could be a little more than what you need. So it's always trying to develop a compelling case of why you need this for your business, why you can grow with Salesforce, why Salesforce is better than XYZ. We are a multi-billion-dollar company, a little over $20 billion, but it's always a fight. It's always a dog fight. Our customers in our space, where what I sell into, are always looking for best in class. So you can be Salesforce all day and you can can, talk the talk about having what we call like a C360, where everything is integrated all into once into one platform. Or for instance, like some people call one throat to choke. You only have one person, one vendor, one person to deal with. That's nice. But at the end of the day, if you don't meet the client's needs, then you don't have a compelling enough case. I mean, we'll lose deals. Absolutely. So it's always a fight.
Yeah, always a fight. Okay, spoken like a true sales rep. All right, so talk to us a little about where you came from, because you're on the show today because you actually came from the medical sales space, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is very interesting. I didn't start off in med sales. I graduated college with a degree in chemistry and a minor in biology. The idea was to go to med school. And my first job out of college was selling dumpsters over the phone.
Oh, you know what? That is new. I have not heard that one before.
Yeah, I was cold calling, selling dumpsters over the phone. And that kind of started because in college, my senior year, I had an internship as a chemical engineer. And I was doing that. And then, I'd be working with the same 8 or 10 people every day in the same lab. I did like electroplating, which is like anything that you have, like, if you use a keyboard, use an iPhone, you touch a doorknob, all these things are electroplated. So I worked in a facility doing that. And I noticed these kind of well-dressed guys, and I mean well-dressed, like, came in with like shirts or something like myself right now. And I never worked with them, but they occasionally came in every month and they just kind of, talked to people, smiled, shook hands and all that stuff. And I asked my manager, I said, who are these people coming in? They was like, oh, our sales reps. And a light bulb just shot off in my head. And I was like, you can sell chemicals? Now I know you can sell. There's a salesperson for everything in the world.
Right. Everything. Every single thing.
Everything. But at the time, I didn't even cross my mind. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And I was networking with reps because my mom was an anesthesiologist technician. So I was networking with med reps and trying to learn, like, hey, how do I break in? How do I, blah, blah, blah. So I was talking to people with 5, 10, 20 different years of experience. I'm like, oh, well, you got to get into B2B sales. You got to, sell printers. You got to sell copiers. And I was like, I am not doing that. I said, I'm going to find my own way. I do no interest in that. So obviously, what's more compelling than that? Selling dumpsters. I was slinging the resume out on LinkedIn, and I was in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time. I went through an interview with a company called Rubicon Global, and they were a sustainability company, but I worked in SMB. So it was just like cold calling every small business from the East Coast to the West Coast, trying to get them to switch from their current provider to us. And that was all paid on margin. So I did that in the first month. I did that. I never forget the story. We came in like cohorts of 20 or 30, and they brought in new cohort maybe once a month. And then eventually I think once every 3 weeks, and they were just really growing. And so when I came in, I think most people had closed the deal within the first 4 weeks, and they had you like kind of on like a ramp quota. And the first 4 weeks, everyone had closed the deal. I have not closed anything. And I'm just like calling my mom every day, like just trying to figure out how I'm going to make it. I moved from Charlotte, North Carolina to Atlanta with enough money to live for a month and a half. Wow. I signed a sublease with a person I never met until I got down there. The day I got there, I signed a lease, and we didn't even do it through the apartment complex. This was just a handshake. He could have kicked me out the next day. I just paid my money for like 6 weeks of living. Side story, 4 weeks into me living there, that it was a man and a woman. They had bought a house, moved outside of Atlanta, like OTP, if you're familiar with Atlanta, like OTP. And 3 weeks into me living there, he said, hey, can you move out? We rented our house to somebody. He could kick me out at any time. So he's just being kind of nice. And I'm like, I'll try to get out. But again, I haven't clicked a commission check. I'm not selling anything. So now I have the pressure of this guy wanting me to leave. I don't have another place to stay. I haven't made any sales. And so, man, it is very much like I have to figure this out. Like, how am I going to do this? And when I was doing it, I was on the phone, like, getting a callus in my ear every day. I was trying to be somebody I wasn't. I was trying to listen to everybody else, trying to figure out like, okay, how do you do this? I'm reading this script, hey, customer. And I got to a point where I was just like, man, look, this isn't working. Like, what do I have to lose anymore? I'm about to probably get fired, move back to North Carolina, like with my tail between my legs, and just I don't know what's going to happen. And so I got to the point where I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to be me. I'm just going to be authentic. I'm just going to call. I'm just going to whatever. At this point, I was just like, it can't get worse than it is right now. 5 weeks into it, I closed a deal that was bigger than anybody else on my cohort for 2 different locations. And then that was a switch. It was just felt like a movie at that point. At that point, it just like took off, and it was transactional sales, right? So it was like you had to hit all these KPIs, like a certain amount of calls, a certain amount of pipeline, a certain amount of close won, right? And I was always a person who I didn't close small deals. I always closed 1 or 2 deals that closed the entire month, like that, like locked out my whole, like I was done with quota. Yeah. Most people had to close anywhere from, I'd say 6 to 8 deals. I was closing 1 to 2, and I was doing 300% of quota month over month. And I never forget, I was when we first came in as a cohort, the VP of sales was like asking us to brainstorm, like who could we prospect? Like, what businesses should we call? Oh, we should call restaurants. We should call Target, or not like a Target necessarily, but like a department store of some sort. Like, typical things you see dumpsters. And I was like, you should call chemical companies, because I just worked for one. I know what was going on. So you just call Kim, and he kind of gave me the like, oh, okay, settle down a little bit. Month 2, closed a deal bigger than anybody had seen in SMB with a chemical company in Atlanta. And I still remember the name of the company. And he came over, shook my hand. I shook his hand. I said, you told me I couldn't do this. I just want to let you know. And at that point, I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so I did that for a while, but I was looking for more of a technical background, trying to develop myself into like going into med sales eventually. So because I had this background in chemistry and biology, and I wanted to be in med sales. Right. So I took this job with a company called T-Drill, where I was selling machinery to mechanical contractors. So I traveled 2 to 2.5 weeks out of every month. I'm talking 60-70% of the time I was gone. My territory was the United States. Wow. I took it was like a F-350. It was like a dually truck with a motorcycle trailer attached to it, full of equipment. This whole setup was maybe 5 feet shy of a tractor trailer, and roughly maybe $250,000 I was driving around the country. And I was like 23 at the time doing this. I mean, like, I was like, I have no clue how to drive this thing. I have no clue what these kind of customers are, what the persona is, like what they're looking for.
What do they expect of you in the position then?
They needed someone out there who was willing, who had the grit, and who had like the endurance, and who was like hitting the ground running. And like, I kind of had proved that from the last job. Like, hey, go figure it out. Go drive around, call, like set appointments. I was that guy. So I was just boom, boom, boom on the phone, setting appointments. I'd go back to the office, set appointments, go fly there and drive around, move the truck to the next place. And I took it from Atlanta all the way up to Seattle, back down to Tennessee. And I was just driving around, man. I met so many interesting people. And what that taught me was not only the grit, but like how to sell to different people. I'm this like I'm this guy from the South, like we're used to Southern hospitality. But as I moved to Texas, I moved to like New Mexico, I moved to California. It's like the personalities and personas slightly change, and like how people go about things. Like if you're from the South, like, Southern hospitality is a real thing. It's like, so if you don't like kind of get to know someone, talk about their family, like break bread a little bit, it's talking about business is not happening. It's to some people. Like, it's just like, you kind of need to know me a little bit. Like we kind of have, but you get to some places and it's like, hey, what do you need? What do you want? Like, let's get to it. And so it can be like a little different, right? It's different people. And so I learned that lesson. And then after doing that for a couple of years, I finally found my way in to med sales with a company called Otska. So they have a program which I highly recommend anyone check out now. It's called Ready Now. I was like, I think cohort 6. And the interesting thing at the time, I don't know where they are now, probably cohort 12, but the interesting thing at the time was essentially they take people with like 2 to 3 years of experience, some people fresh out of college, and they would give you like all the resources and training that any kind of med rep would get. The caveat was you would be filling short-term vacancies in hopes of getting a full-time role. So we were hired directly by the company. Then we weren't hired by like a middleman or like a contracting service. We were hired by the company. And let's say, oh man, you just had a beautiful baby girl. And you're like, hey, I love being a dad. Like, and you're in Santa Monica, let's say you're in LA. And so you go out paternity leave for 2 months, and then you're like, oh man, I love being a dad. I have this other business going. I don't need this. And you leave. And I've been filling your territory for 2 months. And the manager's like, Tori, we need to fill this territory. Sam's gone. We got to fill this. I'm going to interview 5 different candidates. I'll interview you as well. You've been doing a good job so far. So essentially, that's how it would ideally work. Sure. So where you're competing against people externally and internally for your own role. And like you have 0 to 1 years of experience versus people with 5 to 10. But the thing that you do have is the company, the territory. So, but you can get sent anywhere in the country. So So I was in Atlanta at the time, and I told them, I said, I really want to be in California. As I traveled around, the United States, I really had this affinity for San Francisco for some reason. I cannot explain this. I got to San Francisco. I never forget this. I was driving on the highway. If anybody knows San Francisco, Lyft used to have have an office with a big pink van as a billboard sign coming up the highway. I passed this van, and as soon as you pass it, all of a sudden the city just opens up. You see the whole skyline, and I was like, it just felt this energy, just felt this vibe. I was like, I have to be here. This is where I need to be. And I told them, I said, hey, you can like let them know like your top 3 choices where you want to be. I think I told them like California, like 2 different places in California. I think I told them Seattle. I get sent to Biloxi, Mississippi. So not anywhere where I wanted to go. So
you're having heart-to-heart moments with California, and you end up in Mississippi. Classic.
End up in Mississippi, and I'm just like, what is going on? Like, I'm where I want to be, but I'm not where I want to be.
Sure.
So I get moved to Biloxi, Mississippi. I let the manager respectfully know, first meeting, hey, I'm here to help you. I'm here to grow this territory. I want to be great, but I don't want to be here full time. Like, just letting them know, like, just, as a courtesy, and just like, you have to kind of stand up for your career and like where you're going to go. Right. Mm-hmm. So he totally understood that. Within like a month or 2, he'd offer me the full-time job. Like, me being there, because I had done really well. It was his territory, and then he was a manager. So I was in kind of a tough spot. Like, out of all the territories he was running, I was running his territory. And by not taking that role, you do stand the chance of eventually not graduating out of this program, and just like kind of ends. So after being there for 6 months, a role opens up in San Francisco. A guy in San Francisco got promoted to home office. I get that role in San Francisco, and then I finally moved to San Francisco. I mean, it's just like a dream come true. Like, everything that I'm wanting to happen is happening, and it is just like, this is crazy. I get to San Francisco, and San Francisco is a very different territory than Mississippi. It's very locked territory where it's like, it's hard to see physicians. Nobody really wants to see physicians. They kind of like are about medical sales reps, influencing them and stuff. And so I moved there and got offered that role within the first like 3 months of being there full time. So graduated out of the program, full time there. While being there in San Francisco, if anybody's been there, you can't go get a beer, go anywhere without hearing about tech something. I mean, Salesforce Tower is the biggest thing there. It's a beaming tower in the middle of the city, tech everywhere. So you just naturally kind of gravitate towards these conversations, and you hear about them. So I started learning about it, and I knew I was making good money, but I heard about tech, and I heard the kind of money they were making, and I was like, hold on, I'm not making that money.
Our listeners are gonna be like, what money, what dollars amount is he talking about?
So I think in most people, for like, I was working in biotech, and I was doing like an injectable medication. I was also doing digital medication. And I'd say like an average within what I was doing, you could average somewhere around 130, 140. I know like med device reps can do, average across the nation, can do a little higher than that. Obviously you have some people are going to do much higher than that, right? I'm just talking average. Sure. I was hearing numbers like 200, 250, 300. I was hearing 7 figures. Work-life balance. They were working from like an office where, they were just walking around in their pajamas, drinking beer, like, like coffee, like, on tap. And I was just like, what is this world? And I met my amazing partner there within like the first month, and she was in tech. And then I learned even more about tech, and was starting to visit her offices and just hearing more about the industry. And I was like, I need to do that. I could just see the writing on the wall. I mean, obviously tech was already big at the time. It wasn't like it wasn't like it was pre-2000 and I saw the .com bubble, but I could see, I was like, yeah, I need to transition this, because the amount of money you can make, the flexibility, like the things that you could do. And like, I mean, tech was taking over every part. I mean, even pharma is getting, in med sales is getting bigger and bigger into technology and tech and digital transformation. So I'm like, it's kind of like the gold mine analogy, where it's like, I'm not going to go get gold. I'm going to sell shovels. Like, I'd rather be on the side of technology. This is where it's running everything.
Right.
So I finally started networking with different people, networked with a friend who worked at VMware, and I found out that there were like healthcare verticals within tech. So like, obviously technology is everywhere, like we just said, including hospitals. So I eventually was able to network my way into a role and get in front of the hiring manager. And I never forget this. She told me she took my meeting as a professional courtesy. And she'll probably listen to this and laugh because she knows it's true. She took my meeting as a professional courtesy. We met in San Francisco at a mall. And she had no intention on hiring me, no intention on even like really entertaining me at all. It was more so like, this guy's been bothering me for like the last 6 months. He won't leave me alone. I'm just going to say, hey, I took his call, right?
Right.
By the end of it, she was telling me about a role in Seattle that would open up.
Wow. Come on.
And then 6 months later, I'm hired on
That's
to
fantastic.
VMware doing enterprise sales within HLS. About a little over a year later, I was moving up to Seattle for that role. So I did at VMware, I was also a core rep. So I was selling like the full suite for VMware. VMware specializes in like virtualizing machines. So instead of like, for instance, like a simple analogy, like instead of you buying like one desk, like instead of like a one desktop, or like, and say you need 10 desktops, instead of like buying 10, you can virtualize that one into like 20 or 10 different machines. You
Explain
can
that a little bit more.
virtualize. Yeah.
Explain that a
So
little
like, I think like the easy analogy would be like if you ever been like, have you ever seen like a movie where they show you like the IT department? It's like all those computers that are stacked all the way up to the like 10 feet
bit. Right.
tall, and looking, there's a bunch
Yeah.
of cords and stuff. So instead of like buying like a whole warehouse of those machines to operate your like your IT environment, you can actually virtualize those machines. Essentially, what you're doing is you're renting space
Right.
in
From
someone
right.
else's cloud.
Right.
And VMware specialized that. They started that in the 90s, and now they do it for dozens or hundreds of thousands of different companies. And now they have huge partnerships with all the hyperscalers, AWS, GCP, Alibaba Cloud, like all those different companies. So that way companies can operate. Their big thing is companies can operate in a multi-cloud function. So instead of one company, they only use AWS. Well, now they can utilize, like with VMware, the simple pitch is they can utilize AWS, GCP, and Alibaba, which all use different language, but by utilizing the VMware platform, you can talk all in the same language.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of like one of the big pitches there. And I was at VMware for about 2 years, and I was interested in trying to see other things outside of healthcare. Also, I kind of wanted to see like how selling tech to tech would be. I also knew that was a faster industry. I knew we had like more early adopters in that space.
So let's go back to VMware.
Yeah.
Who was your customer?
Yeah. So at VMware, I was selling mostly to like the IT department. So you would sell up to everybody reporting to like the CIO or the CTO. So, but the end users would end up being those healthcare practitioners. So for instance, if you've ever been to a hospital where, for instance, a lot of people be familiar with Epic, right? And they're utilizing Epic like on their phone or on a laptop or on like an iPad. So essentially what VMware could do is they could virtualize a lot of those machines or protect like those edge environments. We call edge environments. There's like edges, laptop, iPads, iPhones, and things of that nature. So VMware could protect, could secure, have everything operate in the cloud. You could run everything through VMware.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then after this stint, what happened?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was doing that at VMware, and I really wanted to sell into the tech space. I was looking to like work with customers that were like a little bit more early adopters and a little bit more on the cutting edge. There's nothing against selling within healthcare space, and I think you can absolutely get some customers who are on the cutting edge. But if you just think about things in the sense of, at least the way I thought about it is, when you go into a hospital, think about your experience as a patient versus if you went to, I don't know, like if you went to like a retail store, or if you went to like a football game somewhere. Like usually the customer experience at places within like a retail space is a little bit more updated, a little bit quicker. If you have like a better experience. And usually it comes from them developing or incorporating new technologies a little faster than other places. So healthcare and like spaces like healthcare and fintech can usually be a little slower, but you can have some amazing, incredibly big deals, transformational deals when you do them in those space. But I was very interested to see how selling tech within the tech space could be. So I've always been interested in Salesforce. I've looked at Salesforce as like the pinnacle of selling. Like I've always heard of like, if you want to get your MBA in sales, go to Salesforce. And so I was like, man, I wonder if I've thrown my hat in the ring before and always kind of been rejected. And I was like, I wonder if I could find my way in. And finally, I just did the same thing that I do at every job. I network my way in. Instead of like applying, I'll network with this person. I'll speak to a hiring manager. I'll speak to a recruiter. It's the same set of skills that you use to do your job as a sales. So it's like, why don't you use those same set of skills, develop yourself and use it for yourself? So I was able to get in front of a hiring manager. They were able to then refer me to one of the recruiters, and then things just kind of went from there. And eventually I was interviewing at Amazon for AWS. I was interviewing at Salesforce, LinkedIn, a few other companies. And I went with Salesforce, and it was like, to me, it was like a dream come true. At this point, I'd kind of like went from selling dumpsters, which is to me is like, if you think about baseball, it's like single A league, like you're just trying to get
Sure.
known, to like the major leagues. Like I was selling
Yeah.
on I was selling at the biggest company I knew, like on the biggest platform. It was like, hey, if you're going to make a name for yourself, hey, if you're going to know you're good at this, it's like, hey, you need to go play in
Yeah.
this ballpark. And so
That's,
like now it's kind of like a dream come true.
now that you're living it, is everything that you heard about what this experience would be like, is it that?
So yes and no, right? I think everything comes with like there's a balance, like a feedback, and like in your reality of things. Like, is the money that you can make like absolutely true? Yes, but it is an absolute grind. It is nothing. There's nothing easy about it. Like even working at like a name brand company like Salesforce, nothing is given to me. My customers, they're like, great, yeah, you're Salesforce, but we don't care. Like you still have to service us. One of like the things that really sticks out to me is a quote I heard from one of my leaders, which is, selling won't help, helping will sell.
Mm,
It sticks with me. Like every time I go work with one of my customers, it's like, how can I show them I work for them?
right.
Not that I work for Salesforce. How can I show them I work for them? And I genuinely do mean that. Like I've stepped out of sales cycles that I'm like, hey, look, this isn't the right product for you. This, like what we have going on right now is not the best fit for what you have. I'm not the salesperson who's going to sell anything to you just because it's ours. It's like, I'm not willing to ruin that relationship for like a small sale, medium sale, large. It doesn't matter. I'm not willing to like put my name on the line for that. I really think Salesforce does that really well in terms of being by the customer and really sticking by the customer and doing what's right for them. Out of any company I've worked for, not saying no one has done it well, I'm saying I think Salesforce, being the size they are especially, does it the best. And I think every team is going to have a different experience, but that's really been my experience. So yeah, I
I
think,
love it.
yeah, it's been an amazing journey, but like it's not come without a lot of grind, and it is very strategic. I mean, you're selling directly to the C-suite. You are working with like, directors and administrators, but it is very strategic, and you're having to really think long term, like what moves you're making now and how that's going to impact
Mhm.
3 to 6 months from now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fantastic. So, here's the big question. You hear a lot of medical sales reps wanting to get into tech sales, and you
Yep.
also hear tech sales reps thinking about getting into medical sales. You've had the opportunity to experience both. Play devil's advocate for both sides, Start with what you like and give us why you do either.
So I think it depends. Like on, for one, I think you have to look at what are your interests. Like I had an interest, like I got my degree in chemistry and biology. So I really had that medical interest. I went and
Mhm.
did it, and I had a great time doing it. And I was interested in going into like med device as well. But man, I'll be honest with you, man, I love not only the benefits, but I love working from home. I love being able to work remotely. I mean, I'm sure there's some med sales out there who can do that, but a lot of times, like you're either on call, on the road, at the hospital, at the inpatient. I love being able to visit my customers and go on site. Don't get me wrong. I do that quite often. I travel quite a bit, but I do love being able to work from home, working with my customers from, my office. But I think it really depends on like you're truly passionate about, like what makes you tick. Like, do you really like working in the OR, the ER, the inpatient? Is that something that really is interesting to you? Or do you have an interest in tech? Do you want to understand like what this space is about? I think it's good having both sides of things. But like for me personally, I just think the flexibility, the work-life balance is better than tech. And yeah, so that's probably like my main reasons of
He's like, look,
enjoying it.
man, I'm sold on tech, and that's what it is. All right,
Yeah.
then I'll say this. Outside of really being clear on what your interests are, for any medical sales reps that are listening and thinking about, they've had a fascinating career in med sales and they've loved it, and they're considering making a move. What would you say to definitely be, to definitely keep in mind if you're considering making that type of transition?
Keep in mind, like there's a few things I'd probably keep in mind, but like for one, I'd say think about like what your skill set is, like and what you're really good at and how you can best leverage that. So for me, for instance, I was coming, and for probably everyone who's listening to this, I was coming from healthcare. So let's leverage that same experience to get you within like a tech company that focused on healthcare. And once you get in tech, it's just like medical sales. Once you're in, you're in. You can
Sure.
then maneuver from there.
Right.
Find
Right.
your way, like, use your leverage there. So keep that in mind, like leverage your way in. Because there's some people who like, oh, well, I was in healthcare, but I want to go into fintech. And it's like, it's doable, it's possible, absolutely. But it's like, you probably are better to try to leverage what what you have, of what your skill set is, and then from there maneuver. And also, like, you don't necessarily know what you don't know. You may love it in healthcare. And I know people who, for a fact, I can say this, I know for a fact people who make 7 figures within the tech space who are working with healthcare customers. I know multiple of them. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. I think another thing to keep in mind is what kind of transactions you like to be involved in. Like, are you somebody who's like, hey, look, I want to like knock out a bunch of transactions. I want to have like a pretty high volume of sales going. Are you somebody who's like, no, I want to work with 1 or 2 accounts, and I want to be as strategic as possible with that account and go as deep as I can. I want to feel like I essentially work at that account, because I always thought, like, to me, like, sales was more chess. Like, to me, I like to look at sales as like chess. It's like thinking multiple moves ahead on what every move is going to end up impacting. Some people like to play checkers with sales, and there's nothing wrong with that. I know people who are making amazing money within like the SMB space, some small to medium sized business. There's some people who make more money in SMB, like, because usually it goes SMB, mid-market, enterprise. Like, that's kind of the general consensus. There are people who make more money in SMB than people who make in enterprise. There are different things to consider. In enterprise, you might have 1 account. You live and die by that 1 account. SMB, you might have 30 accounts, but there's different KPIs, there's different structures. So think about what you really want to get into. But yeah, I'd say that would be probably the 2 main things. I know some subtopics there, but the 2 main things to kind of consider, like your skill set and what you really want to be doing within sales.
So I love how you got into the industry. You know, you really leveraged everything you knew how to, and you really took a gamble on yourself. And it kind of speaks volumes in your character with how you left your house and ended up in a different area in Atlanta altogether, just gambling on yourself. When it comes to programs like what we do here at Evolve Success, helping people get positions, you know, imagine if you had stumbled upon that. How do you see the value of those types of programs?
So in my opinion, I think they're absolutely essential. I think it goes back to like what I was just saying about leverage. It's how can you best leverage yourself? And sometimes that comes in the shape of partnerships with different programs and different groups and different entities. Like, how can you best take your skill set and magnify that and increase the magnitude of your resources and your skills? Like, you know, it's a lot of times, you know, you hear the key phrase of, oh, it's not what you know, it's who you know. It's not who you know, it's who knows you.
Who knows you? Yep.
It's who knows you. You know, a lot of us know celebrities and superstars and all that stuff. And it's what can those people do for you? Absolutely nothing unless they know you. Right. So it's how can you connect with the right people and the right groups and develop those relationships. It's not just like oh, hey, Sam, I'm Tori, like, you know, nice to meet you. And like, you know, hopefully we can work. It's cultivate and develop those relationships. You know, it's and like learn about those people, learn about what you can do for them, like how you can assist them and how you can help them. Those people will remember you. Like, absolutely. It's like, it's one thing I've definitely realized in a short time is how small the world is and how different things are connected. Don't burn bridges. Don't burn bridges, and definitely cultivate relationships. It's the world is a lot smaller than you think it is.
Love it. Love it. You know, with that being said, Tori, is there anything else that you want to share with the audience? Remember, we have listeners that are trying to get into the industry, listeners in the industry, and listeners leading the way. Anything you want to share with them?
I absolutely believe life doesn't happen to you. It happens for you. Again, life doesn't happen to you. It happens for you. So anything that may look like a setback or an obstacle, it is absolutely preparing you for what that next thing is. When I was selling dumpsters, I had no idea that in 5 or 6 years, I'd be doing strategic sales at Salesforce. I did not see that trajectory, but I absolutely needed that experience to get me where I am, to be able to have the conversations and the confidence I have now to be able to handle certain conversations that I have. But like in terms of, you know, getting into the tech space, again, you know, figure out what your skill set is, figure out how to best leverage that, and genuinely look at companies that you may want to work for. There are certain companies that maybe sell in a niche space where you don't necessarily need exact experience. Like, the industry is changing more and more now, especially within tech, where you don't need tech experience. They are looking for people without tech experience. They love if you have medical sales background, but they are looking because they want that diversity of thought. The way you go about prospecting, the way you go about selling, and the way you cultivate relationships are different than tech, like what true tech people are. And they need that. They want that. They'll pay quite a bit of money for it. I highly recommend anyone who's in med sales to take a second look at tech and the potentials. There's a lot of people who I've met who've gone from med sales over to tech. There's a lot of different possibilities within the space. I highly recommend anyone take a look into it. And if you need any help, feel free to reach out.
Excellent. Excellent. Last thing we'll do, a little flash round here. I'm going to ask you 4 questions. You have 10 seconds to answer them. So it's what comes to mind. All right. Okay. Best book you've read in the last 6 months?
Best book I've read in the last 6 months. How to Close Mega Deals. And I am blanking on the author's name and I only have 10 seconds. But again, I read that book because it really teaches you how to think strategically.
Okay, how to close mega deals. Wow.
I'm
So
actually going to look up this up.
you've put things into practice from that book.
Yeah, so Mega Deal Secrets. Hold on, give me a second. I thought it was a pretty good book. Mega Deal Secrets: How to Find and Close the Biggest Deal of Your Career. Jamal Reamer. He's somebody I follow on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, I follow him and I've read that book. I really enjoy it. I think there's a lot of things that he puts into practice because a lot of times when you're trying to close multi-million-dollar deals, these are sales cycles that take 6, 12, 18, can take 6, 12, 18 months. I mean, they can be done in much shorter, but he talks about how to do them in much shorter. A lot of them come down to working at the C level, but how do you work with them? How do you cultivate those relationships? Everyone's trying to, in sales, they're trying to get higher and higher, but it's your messaging has to change and how you approach those different personas has to change. What can you do for them? How can you show them value? Again, selling won't help, helping will sell. But how do you help those individuals? I think that's like a key thing that a lot of different reps should look into.
Oh, you got me. I'm going to go read that book now. That sounds good. All right. And then best movie in the last 6 months.
I really, really enjoyed the Spider-Man multiverse movie. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Nothing too inspiring there, but man, that was a solid movie.
No, that's awesome, man. Big Marvel fan over here. That's great. The best meal you've had in the last 6 months.
Best meal I've had in the last 6 months? Man, I had a meal at a Spanish restaurant on Embarcadero in SF. And I'm trying to remember what the restaurant was in San Francisco. What was this place called? Shoot. Man, I'll have to look it up, but it was an amazing Spanish restaurant that I had.
So for everyone that's in San Francisco, visit Coqueta. Got it. Coqueta. And then last thing, best experience you've had in the last 6 months.
Best experience I've had in the last 6 months. Man, closing over $1 million in ACV.
Congrats.
Yeah, that's 100%.
Excellent. Tori, it was great spending time with you and learning about the tech space. And for all those medical sales reps listening that are interested in tech space, they have something they can kind of rely on now. Last thing I want to address, and this is the very last thing, for those people in tech that are thinking about getting into medical sales, what's the biggest thing you tell them to keep in mind?
I feel like within med sales, I think it depends on, again, there's a couple of things you have to look at. What kind of med sales are you going to get into? You're going to get into device, are you going to get into biotech and get into pharma? I think you have to you have to look at that and look at what you're looking to get out of it. Like, is there something that's like passionate? You have like a certain passion for being in those industries, or is it like a dollar thing that you want to hit? Like, is there certain financial freedom you want to hit? And there's nothing against that. Like, I don't think it's any secret that people like, we're in sales because we like money and we like to, ideally financial freedom is a big thing for a lot of people. But I would say is for people who are interested in that, think about like what space you really want to be in and why you want to be in it. Because like that's ultimately going to help you with your story. And like when you go into the interview, like why you want to be in this space and you telling your story. Interviews don't come down to like, and this goes same thing for tech, but it doesn't come down to just answering a bunch of questions and reading your resume. Anybody can read it. It's how you develop that story, how you talk about like where you've been and where you're going and where you're going to go, and how like this med sales job fits into that. So I would say give a lot of thought into like what you really want to be doing and like how it fits into who you are as a person and what you really want to be doing. Ultimately, that will light a certain kind of fire in you too when things get tough, because in sales, things are always going to get tough. You're always going to have to remember, like, why are you here? Why do you want to do this thing? And, I think if money is the only reason you want to do this thing, it's probably going to get rougher than you can really handle. So there needs to be more than just that. There needs to be more than just a financial outcome. So think about why you want to be doing these things.
Tori, again, thank you for spending time on the show, and we look forward to keeping up with you.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
And that was Tori Mosley. Interesting stuff. I know you got some insight into what it means to be in tech sales, and hopefully it gives you enough insight to help you make a better decision about where you should be. But more importantly, if you're listening to this episode and you're wondering where in medical sales you should be or what you should consider, or you're ready to finally make the leap into medical sales, but you don't really know how to do it, or you've been trying and you haven't been getting very far, whether it be not getting any interviews or not getting selected by any organizations, now is the time to do something different. Go to evolveyoursuccess.com and follow the prompt. Schedule some time with us by filling out our application, and let's have a conversation about how we can get you into a medical sales role. As always, we do our best to bring you innovative guests that are doing things differently in the medical sales space. So make sure you tune in next week for another episode of the Medical Sales Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And remember, I have a couple programs that show you exactly how to break into the medical sales industry, become a top-performing medical sales professional, and also how to masterfully navigate your career to executive-level leadership. Check out these programs and learn more at evolveyoursuccess.com. Stay tuned for more awesome content with amazing interviews.